learn to play Battletech in 6 minutes. The game of Battletech is divided into 5 different phases: the initiative phase, movement phase, shooting phase, the melee phase, and the heat phase. But of course, first you'll need to build a force for each side. I'd recommend balancing the battle value of your two forces so that they're roughly even. Once you've selected the armies for both sides, it's time to get into rolling some dice. You're going to roll off per deployment to see who goes first. In this case, I have 1 deployment, which means my opponent deploys first. Typically, you'll deploy at opposite ends of the map. Take turns deploying your mechs until all units are deployed. Start of turn 1, you want to roll initiative. You roll 2d6, and whoever rolls higher gets to go second. The player who goes second gets to act with more information, so it is a pretty big advantage. Next, begin moving your units. Units that have already moved will have their names denoted in gray in Mech Lab. Continue to alternate moving mechs until all mechs have been moved. Due to the changes in elevation and the heavy woods, my Griffin is going to have trouble walking quickly, so instead, I'll choose to jump. Next, it's time to start firing our weapons. Our Griffin is very close to the javelin, meaning that his weapons are in minimum range. Mech will show you all of the modifiers, but if you're playing on Tabletop, you'll have to calculate the GATOR yourself. GATOR stands for Gunnery, Attacker Movement Modifier, Target Movement Modifier, Other, and Range. Most of the modifiers are listed here. For a more in-depth look, go through the combat section of a game of armored combat. Since the javelin is so close in our minimum range, we'll choose to fire at the further Atlas instead. The PPC produces 10 heat when fired, and since we jumped 5 spaces, we also produce 5 heat from that, meaning that our heat begins to build up quickly. After you've declared all of your attacks, then it's time to start rolling some dice. You roll 2d6 and see if you can roll over the target number. Remember to factor in all of the GATOR modifiers before you roll. If you manage to land a hit, then roll on the location table, depending on where you're standing in regards to the other mech. This diagram shows which spaces that you should be standing in order to get a particular arc. If you're standing in any of the gray spaces, the one being attacked chooses which arc you're firing from. The enemy Hunchback is proving to be a real ace. He rolled a through armor critical and crit the engine of our Phoenix Hawk, and also hit us in the head. This means that he rolled a 12 and a 2 on the location table, which he then followed up with 8 or a 9 on the critical effect table. Since the Phoenix Hawk took at least 20 damage, it then needed to make a pilot skill roll, requiring a roll of 5, which was its piloting skill. Rolling a 2, it falls, and on the damage location table, rolled a 12, meaning that it was hit in the head again. The Phoenix Hawk's cockpit was completely destroyed, and the Phoenix Hawk is now dead. Check my How to Kill a Battle Mech video to find out more ways to kill battle mechs. Since no one was in range to make melee attacks, we skipped the melee phase. We're now into the heat phase. Because the Griffin fired all of its weapons and jumped 5, it produced 19 heat. Since it only has 12 heat sinks, it now has 7 heat built up. It needs to start cooling off this turn, otherwise it's going to start getting very hot. We'll cover the effects of heat in a moment. At the end of turn 2 in the movement phase, we've now closed into point-blank range. Hunchback and Grasshopper, and Wolverine and Archer are going to be engaging in mech melee with one another. But because the Griffin is behind the Atlas, the only thing the Atlas can do to it is punch it. You have to be in the forward arc in order to make a kick. Once again, a mech has been knocked prone by taking damage. For each 20 damage that you take, increase the pilot skill roll by 1. In this case, the Hunchback needed a 6 because its piloting skill is 5 and it took 20 damage. If it had taken 40 damage, it would need to roll a 7 instead. Now it's time for the melee phase. You should usually try and use a kick as your primary form of melee, because kicks have a chance to knock the enemy over, similar to taking 20 damage in a round. Here the Griffin makes a kick at the Atlas. Since I was in the right side arc, it will always hit the right leg. The Wolverine, however, could hit either leg from the front arc. Since the Grasshopper is 1 level down from the Hunchback, and it fired the weapons in its arms, it cannot punch, and since the Hunchback is raised above it on level 1, it also can't kick. If the Hunchback wasn't prone, it would be able to kick the Grasshopper. If you miss a kick, you also have to make a piloting skill roll. Similar to shooting, just roll 2d6 and add any relevant modifiers onto your piloting skill. Playing in Mech is easy enough, and I'd recommend it for beginners, since it does all of the rolling for you, and can save you a lot of time. But if you want to play on the Tabletop, you're going to need a few things. Firstly, you're going to need a Battletech record sheet. Here's one for the Grasshopper. Under Warrior Data, you'll find your Gunnery skill and Piloting skill. Your pilot can also take damage. If you ever take 6 damage with a pilot, the pilot is dead. Damage can be caused by things like ammo explosions and head hits. On the right here, we have our mech paper doll. Each bubble denotes a point of armor or a point of internal structure. When your mech takes damage, simply mark off the bubbles. I'd recommend printing these out and putting them in some kind of plastic sleeve and using a dry erase marker. The mech's frontal armor is denoted here, its rear armor is denoted here, and its internal structure is denoted here. Earlier, I got a through armor critical on my mech. Once all of the armor in a section is destroyed and you start taking internal damage, you roll for a critical hit every time that section is hit. If you take 2 hits to the gyro or 3 hits to the engine, your mech is dead. Similarly, if the head is destroyed or the cockpit is crit out, the mech is also dead. If you roll a successful critical hit, you roll on the critical hit table. First, roll for which section you hit on this side, and then roll for which component you hit on this side. Here you can see your mech's weapons. It lists the type of weapon, the number of weapons in a given location, how much heat they produce, how much damage they deal on a hit, and their ranges. Measuring ranges in Mech is very easy. The game takes care of it for you. But on the table, you'll just have to count out hexes. Keep in mind the range modifiers listed here when you're calculating your GATOR. After you've rolled hit and location, the weapon does the listed amount of damage to that spot. Certain weapons, like missiles, are cluster weapons and require an additional roll on this is the cluster table. This version is a little more complete than the one that you'll find in the Game of Armored Combat or rulebook, but the LRM-5, for example, would roll 2d6 on the cluster table and would do the listed amount of damage. Larger packs, such as LRM-15s, have a shotgun effect, able to hit in multiple locations with a single shot. In the case of LRMs, you hit in clusters of 5, meaning that if you rolled a 7 on an LRM-15, you would do 5 damage to one location and 4 damage to another location. I have a more in-depth video on heat. Check that out if you want more detail. But essentially, the hotter your mech gets, the more bad things start happening. And all of these things can cause extra heat to your mech, in addition to the heat from firing your weapons. Your mech will remove an amount of heat equal to its heat sinks, or, if they have advanced double heat sinks, twice the amount of their heat sinks. The next thing you'll need to play on Tabletop is some kind of representation of your mech on the table. You can either buy minis from Catalyst Game Labs or Ironwing Metals, or use any of these ideas here. Finally, you'll need some maps to play on. There are optional rules where you can use 1-inch increments to replace hex maps, but I prefer hex maps myself. You can either buy packs of them from various companies, or you can just go online and print a few out. Thanks for watching, everyone. Pour one out for my Phoenix Hawk pilot, and remember to like and share the content with your fellow mech warriors, and subscribe if you want to see more Battletech content. Good hunting, mech warriors. Have a great day.